Chapter 11 S.O.S. Immediately after the meeting, Ariel and Jacob returned to the apartment. Jacob started toward his storage niche, but Ariel forestalled him. "Fix a large garden salad, Jacob," she said, "with Thousand Island and a couple of glasses of milk. Set the table for two, and then join me. It wouldn't hurt you to act like human for a change, like you're enjoying my company. That's an order." "That is an order not difficult to comply with," Jacob said. "Do you like the Thousand Island dressing?" Ariel asked. "Whatever pleases you, Miss Ariel. Lacking true taste buds, I really have no preference." "What a shame! You're missing the half of the pleasure of life." "Experiencing the pleasure of taste has never been my privilege, but of course," he added swiftly so as to preclude generating displeasure for Ariel, "neither have I missed it." "Did you have any reaction to the meeting this morning, then? Pleasure, displeasure?" "My post-Huronic potentials registered a sharp disturbance when it was apparent the aliens were not going to endorse your proposal. I was reacting, however, not to a subjective or objective analysis, but to the knowledge that you were going to be intensely disappointed and in a quandary as to how to proceed." "You've certainly analyzed my reaction correctly. Quandary is the operative word. I have held off calling Derek until now, because I wanted to be able to tell him what he had to do, rather than have him tell me what I had to do." Jacob keyed the food processor and received a head of lettuce, 2 tomatoes, a cucumber, a handful of mushrooms, a block of cheddar cheese, a block of ham, a package of bacon bits, and a package of croutons. Derek had done a great deal to improve food processor technology while he was on Robot City. "I really had a darn good chance of being in the driver's seat," Ariel continued. "When that farm inspiration came to me, I really thought it was the answer. I really thought old Sinapa would buy it." She didn't say anything more then. The vision of green Auroran truck farms and golden wheat fields had come to mind. She could see the robots moving down the green, weedless rows, harvesting lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, the very things Jacob was taking from the food processor. Those same farms would flourish equally well right here in Oyster World. This world could be the breadbasket for this part of the developing galaxy, and without interfering with the aliens at all. There'd be no need for expensive and energy-wasting food processors in this part of the galaxy, if all one wanted was a simple green garden salad. She'd failed to create the same image in Sinapo's mind, but how could she have succeeded? How was he to understand something that was as alien to him as his government was to her? She'd been expecting too much. Yet, was his government so strange? She herself had seen many instances on Aurora, city governments with their bureaus and committees and councils, which Patero's principle fit perfectly, all positions filled with incompetence, almost without exception. "I guess it's not so strange that the aliens didn't buy my proposal," she said. "They're aliens, and they can't possibly think like we do. Yet their government makes sense, odd sense, mind you, as you might expect coming from aliens. Nothing a bunch of humans would ever come up with. Makes too much sense. And I guess it's just wistful thinking to expect Sinapa to change his mind, so when you think about it, I guess I'm not really in a quandary, am I, Jacob?" "So it would appear, Miss Ariel," Jacob replied. In a process that was too fast for the human eye to follow, he had torn the lettuce into bits, sliced the tomatoes, had diced everything else except the bacon bits and croutons. Now he was tossing, in a large bowl, everything but the ham, cheese, bacon bits, and croutons. "They'll close the dome tomorrow," Ariel said, "and we'll be camping out." "That seems to be the only logical deduction." "So I've got to call Derek for help, right?" "Quite so," Jacob agreed. "How do I do that?" "I do not have personal knowledge of that function. I will check with Wooler 9 using the comlink." At the same time he keyed the food processor for milk and Thousand Island dressing. Ariel said nothing, and then, while he set the table, Jacob reported from the comlink. "Avernus 9 supervises Mr. Avery's special monitor link." Tie into him, Ariel said. I now have Avernus 8. Avernus 9, Jacob said. Tell him to transmit the following message to Derek. Ariel hesitated, thinking, while Jacob finished putting everything on the table. He had topped 2 bowls of salad with diced ham and cheese, ladled out a generous dollop of Thousand Island. Then she said, "No, ask him first what's special about Derek's link. How does it work?" She sat down at the table and motioned for Jacob to do likewise, and they both began to eat. Avernus 8 says that the connection with Derek's internal monitor is not made over hyperwave, Jacob said. It's a special system Dr. Avery developed. The equipment is mounted on the mobile platform supporting the computer mainframe and on all the mainframe backup platform, but is accessible by all 7 supervisor robots. And who has detailed technical knowledge of the system? Ariel asked. User's manual, wiring diagrams, maintenance manual? Avernus 9, the technician on each of the 2 computer platforms. I'll bet a pewter button that Derek's special link does use hyperwave, but unlike it's ever been used before. It's not common, ordinary, discrete modulation. Dr. Avery has beat us to it, darn it. He's already invented the alien's continuous modulation. Jacob, hook Chemo into your comlink connection, and tell Avernus to describe Derek's monitor system to him. See if the 2 of them don't agree that it's continuous modulation of hyperwave, as Chemo would define it. That connection and analysis took a little longer than quick, but still consumed less than 2 minutes. Avernus 8 replies in the affirmative, Jacob said. To communicate with all robot cities, Master Derek's internal monitor metabolically manipulates hyperwave in a manner similar to what Chemo describes as continuous modulation. Bingo! Ariel said. Derek does it and doesn't even know how he does it. And I don't need to know anything about engineering to do engineering. Tell Avernus to ring up Derek and give him this message. Crisis here on Oyster World. You must immediately reprogram Avery robots. I also have a bit of important engineering technology to teach you, dum-dum. In fact, your own internal engineering. So come at once. Sign it, Love Ariel, and ask for confirmation. For 10 minutes Jacob said nothing while Ariel forked salad into her mouth and mooned over Derek. With that wild imagination one has when extrapolating hope, she visualized Sanapo meeting with her before Derek arrived, telling her the aliens had changed their minds and would accept her proposal. She would then be the aliens' kind of leader. No matter what, the robots would have to be reprogrammed. They weren't going to build any robot city on this planet. While they were finishing their lunch, Jacob broke the silence. Avernus 8 has received this reply from Master Derek. On my way, smarty pants. Love, Derek. She spent the rest of the afternoon on the balcony, which overlooked Main Street, sitting in the subdued light of the perpetual dusk under the dome, reading a book of poems she took with her whenever she traveled, selected poetry of old Earth. It was an ancient book, bound in soft brown imitation suede, and printed in a small graceful font on one side of a thin, translucent, parchment-like paper. It was the only thing her mother had ever given her that she truly treasured. Juliana Welsh had given her a lot of expensive things, clothes, jewelry, cars, flyers, jumpers, but seldom anything with the taste and thought that was reflected in the selection of that little book. She wondered if her mother had picked it out or had merely asked one of their robots to pick up something via the hyperwave shopping service. She came to a very short poem she had forgotten, but when she reread it, it seemed like a piece of wisdom that might apply at almost any time in a person's life. Robert Frost wisdom. The secret sits. We dance round in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. That's what she seemed to be doing, dancing around the solution to the problem. She had come so close to the answer in that meeting with Sanapo and his lieutenants. He had said as much with that elaborate apology he had left her with, as though he would have done things differently if it had been left up to just him. In that case, would he really have bought her proposal? She looked up every now and then to stare at the opening in the dome. It made her uneasy. What if they could suddenly close it and trap them all inside that insidious blackness? There'd be no way out, no way that human technology could provide. But she didn't want to camp out, and she certainly didn't want to spend any more time in that cramped, tiny two-passenger jumper than she absolutely had to. After dinner, Jacob rigged a viewing screen on the balcony so she could spend the evening keeping an eye on that critical opening in the dome, while she watched a library tape of the old hyperwave drama involving Elijah Bailey, Gladia Solaria, and the robot Daniel Oliva. She could not see the dome opening when she looked up. The starshine in the black sky was not bright enough to be seen through pupils contracted by the illumination required to present Elijah Bailey in all his glory. But she could see the lights of the robot traffic far out on the plain, traffic that was now diminishing as the material transfer neared completion. When she went to bed, she posted Jacob on the balcony with instructions to call her immediately if he saw any change in the size of the dome opening. In the middle of the night she dreamt that she was trying to escape from the black void inside the dome, piloting her hyperspace jumper with the monster Sinapo sitting beside her in the cockpit, heading on a course that would take them down Main Street with the compass tower far in the distance. But she was still out in the void, hanging motionless at least a kilometer from where Main Street began, and with her throttle pushed to its limit, and stretching away from her toward Main Street were the long, long rows of waving green corn, and standing at the end of Main Street, far away down those rows of corn, was Derek waving and beckoning her to come with him. She turned to look at Sinapo in the midst of a feeling of disoriented horror, and a crimson flame shot out of the blackness beneath his luminous green eyes and burned her hand. She awoke drenched in perspiration, painfully on the sharp corner of the nightstand beside her bed. She finally drifted back to sleep, yearning for Derek to be there in bed beside her, but back on Aurora, not there on Oyster World. By 10 o'clock the next morning, the material transfer dwindled to a halt, and with their limited possessions piled in the runabout beside them, Ariel and Jacob stood outside the dome at the meeting site, keeping vigil with Wooler 9 and his lorry, waiting to witness the final closure of the dome. 5 minutes passed. 10:05 a.m., and no black bodies had shown up to send their shimmering additions down the edge of the dome. Then a half hour, and then an hour, and still no construction activity. There weren't even any signs of pre-construction activity, like the long line of black bodies that had formed on other mornings, heading toward the apex of the dome opening, like a out-spiraling thread unwinding from the black hole, like a spherical black mass that from far away could not be resolved into individual black bodies basking on the wing in the light of the sun. There was no dull black ball in the sky this morning. The black bodies were up there like every other morning, but unlike construction days they were loosely dispersed from horizon to horizon, languidly circling, soaking up the sun's radiation. Ariel and the two robots sat there all day waiting for something to happen, and nothing did. No construction activity, and no visit from the aliens to explain the lack of activity. Ariel ate lunch and dinner from supplies Wooler 9 had stashed in the lorry for her. Supplies that were to last a month, to give them time to get the Oyster World's dilemma resolved. Derek was due to arrive in 3 days. 1 day to get far enough away from the other planet to allow the jump through hyperspace, and 2 days to travel in from the jump arrival point, the nearest clear safe in the Oyster World zone. They spent the night in the open. Ariel slept in the long black seat of the open lorry under the stars of a cloudless sky. She refused to spend another night under the dome with the threat of its imminent closure literally hanging over her. One night like that was enough. Chapter 12. Woolruff Stands Inspection. They arrived at the clearing well before noon, following a large animal trail Derek had discovered and explored with Mandelbrot a few days before. Although the forest cover discouraged the growth of dense underbrush, there were scattered patches that occasionally blocked the trail for Homo sapiens, low branches that the animals who had made the trail, possibly Silverside's erstwhile associates, simply walked under. The trail was clear now, of course. When they had first explored it, Mandelbrot had simply fashioned his arm into a machete, the arm that was made of Robot City material, and cleared the way with a motion that bore some resemblance to a buzzsaw. This morning, Derek led the way, with Mandelbrot next, then Woolruff, and finally Silverside bringing up the rear. Silverside kept up a steady conversation with Woolruff during the hour that it took to reach the clearing. Derek could hear the buzz of conversation, but was too far in front to make out what they were saying. When he reached the clearing, and as they approached, he could hear them clearly, but still couldn't understand them. They were no longer speaking in Standard. Mandelbrot was already erecting the tent as Woolruff walked into the clearing. "I don't believe this," she said. "He's already speaking my language. Not fluently yet, but give him another decade and he'll be speaking it like a native." "Yes, he has a marvelous affinity for new knowledge," Derek said. It made him uneasy, that affinity. Derek gathered some stones from the brook and built a fireplace. Woolruff put the inside of the tent in order. Mandelbrot gathered firewood. Silverside disappeared. It wasn't until Derek finished construction of the fireplace that he noticed Silverside was gone. Woolruff was fast asleep in the tent on one of the cots she had erected. She really wasn't much of an outdoors person. Not at all like Derek in that respect. There was no point in looking for Silverside. This was his habitat far more than theirs. They may never see him again. The thought of that filled Derek with dismay. He had become vitally interested in that strange robot, a fascinating study in alien robotics. He had learned a great deal merely by association, but he needed to learn much more, including its origin and the purpose of its original programming. And he had sucked Woolruff into the problem as well. He had brought her half across the galaxy, as she had so emphatically pointed out. How was he going to explain that he would not need her services any longer, that she had come all this way for nothing? When Woolruff awoke, she took the news of Silverside's disappearance quite calmly. "Good," she said. "Can I go home now, back to civilization? Can we at least go back to the city?" "He'll come back," Derek said more confidently than he felt. "We'll at least stay overnight. He may not come back to the city, but he'll come back here." They spent a quiet afternoon. Derek read, Woolruff slept. Mandelbrot stood guard just outside the clearing, facing away from the campsite with his back against the tree on the other side of the brook. Silverside would have a hard time getting at his switch panel that way. After dinner, after it got dark, hoping to attract Silverside, Derek built up the fire so that it lighted the entire clearing. Mandelbrot stayed in his guard post. Woolruff dozed in the warmth of the fire. Derek thought about Ariel, and that brought him to Jacob Winterson, and, putting Jacob out of his mind, brought him back full circle to worrying about Silverside. The fire died down. Derek was talking when Woolruff quietly laid a hand on his arm and pointed across the fire to the other side of the clearing, the side away from Mandelbrot's guard post. There, just inside the clearing in the faint light of the dying fire, were two gray wolf-like shapes, sitting on their haunches. When he looked at them, the firelight caught the backsides of their eyes, and back to him as a ghostly green glow. That must have been how Woolruff had seen them in the first place. They were otherwise almost invisible. "Master Derrick," Mandelbrot called softly from behind them, "we are surrounded by animals circling around the campsite. Should I take any action?" "Can you suggest anything suitable?" Derrick asked. "Not at the moment," Mandelbrot replied. "Stay at your post, then," Derrick said. "I hate stuff like this," Woolruff said. "Why do you always have to bring me along?" Just then the shape on the right threw back its head and howled, long and piercingly, letting it trail off slowly into a series of soft sobs. That howl was answered by an identical howl from the forest that seemed to progress halfway around the campsite before it, too, sobbed to a finish. The two shapes rose then and trotted toward the campfire. The one on the left was smaller, Woolruff's size, and as they approached the campfire its form became silvery while the form of the other, standing a meter at the shoulder, became more distinctly molted black and dark gray. After coming well into the light of the fire, the larger beast turned and loped into the forest. The small silvery beast came around the fire and sat down on its haunches beside Woolruff. "That was Life Crier," the small beast said. "He wanted to inspect Woolruff." "Silverside?" Derrick queried. "Yes, surely you can tell it's me. The imprint is quite realistic." "And when did I pass muster?" Woolruff asked. "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't, Mistress Woolruff," Silverside replied. She had achieved a remarkable likeness to Woolruff, considering that the robot was an organometallic construction from coarse cellular microbots. The flat face, the pointed ears, the fingered forepaws were all in character. She'd even achieved a good simulation of the fur without creating individual hairs. "I think the wolves have gone, Master Derrick," Mandelbrot informed them. "I would suspect so, Mandelbrot," Derrick said. "Silverside is back. Perhaps you should come and meet her in this new form." Mandelbrot crossed the brook and walked up to the fire. He hardly glanced at Silverside. "Would you like me to build up the fire, Master Derrick?" he asked. "Yes," Derrick said, "and then perhaps you should resume guard duty. Other beasties may come calling, some that are not so friendly." "Those that had just left had not been nearly so friendly at one time," Derrick recalled. "And Silverside, you might post yourself on the other side of the campsite, but don't stray so far into the forest this time." "Mistress Woolruff?" Silverside said, questioning with a rising inflection. "Yes?" "Are those your wishes?" "Of course." Silverside's fealty had clearly shifted to Woolruff. Derrick slept well into the middle of the night. With Silverside back in the fold, his attention had shifted to himself, and he went to sleep yearning to be with Ariel. The gentle snore from the cot next to him reminded him of Ariel, and aggravated the desire, but it was not enough to keep him awake long. That night he didn't dream of Ariel or of anything else. The short hike, the outdoor environment, and the relief connected with Silverside's return promoted sound sleep, and he didn't stir until shortly before dawn, when he was awakened by Avernus's call over his internal monitor, transmitting Ariel's call for help. And thus ends these 2 chapters. I hope you enjoyed, and if the quality is bad and pretty bad on this one, I know it's somewhat bad, but if it's pretty bad, tell me. This one's probably one that's worth re-recording at some point. Because I know at the beginning of the chapter I said Avernus 9 and I meant 8, and I ended up saying Avernus 8-9. I'll actually, if you look in the little description section, I'm gonna put a relative time stamp link to that one. Just because it bugs me. Okay. Hope you've enjoyed. And I'll see you all next Saturday. Bye!